Hello and welcome to the Marathon Medic podcast. My name's Amy and I'm a junior doctor and running coach with an interest in sports and exercise medicine. On this podcast episode, we're talking about triathlon. At the end of this month, I have my first triathlon in the New Forest, and honestly, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I thought it would be a great opportunity to chat to somebody with much more experience and knowledge than me, and to ask all my triathlon-related questions. So I'm very lucky to be joined by Becky Hair. Becky is a physiotherapist and triathlete, and she's kindly sharing her top tips for both triathlon training and things to do on event day itself. Hi Becky, thanks so much for joining me today and hopefully answering all my questions that I have about triathlons.
Hello, good morning. Yes, I hope I can. I really hope I can. I've got a bit of experience in triathlon.
Would you mind just explaining to everyone listening exactly who you are, your background, and also how you got into triathlons as well?
So hi, I'm Becky. I am my intro is always like really long. I'm a physiotherapist with a background in personal training and a triathlete. Well, I was a triathlete for many years after being a swimmer, and now I do lots of running and cycling. There you go.
Perfect. And actually that's interesting because I think most people go into triathlons with swimming as their weakness, but I'm guessing you went in with swimming as your strong point?
Yeah, I grew up in Newcastle up north, and the swimming pool was like 2 minutes around the corner. So I think that's kind of why I ended up doing that, because it was very easy for mum and dad to just drop me at the pool and leave me there for a few hours on a Sunday afternoon. Swimming was always the one. I was never like national standard. Like I think people always think like, oh, you must have been really good, and I wasn't. I just kind of enjoyed swimming and kind of stuck with it, and it was close by and easy. So I was probably like just short of county level when I was like a junior. I went into swimming in triathlon and suddenly found this whole world of swimming in a lake, which was like the scariest thing I'd ever done at the time. So yeah, but it comes, doesn't it? You know, with a bit of practice and various friends kind of holding my hand and pulling me around the lake, kind of had to get better at it.
And how long ago was it that you did your first triathlon?
Oh, so I got into triathlon when I started my physiotherapy degree. I basically swam all through my teens, through my first degree at Newcastle University, and did physiology there. And then kind of just got a bit bored of swimming and getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning all the time and spending all Saturdays, by a poolside doing galas. So got into triathlon at Birmingham Uni in 2013, I believe. Oh, that sounds really long ago, doesn't it? It was like 8 years ago, Jesus. And I basically fell into it. Like my dad's a cyclist, and I'd got bored of swimming, I got into doing some spin bike sessions, and I'd done the Great North Run when I was finishing my first degree. And that was just, recreational kind of running to raise money for Alzheimer's because my gran was poorly. And then, quite enjoyed the running and was like, oh, I'm not dreadful. I did under 2 hours and I sort of didn't really train for it. I was like, oh, this is not bad. And then somebody said, oh, you'd be good at triathlon. You should have a go. And then had a go and was like, oh my God, I'm hooked. Like there's so much I want to learn, and just went from there really. So yeah.
So triathlons obviously have lots of technical components, and I think that's why I'm a bit worried about it and thought I'd have a chat with you before I do my first one in a month. So I was wondering, before we go into exactly how a triathlon should be done, if you had any stories or big mistakes from your early triathlon days that you'd be able to share.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my God, there's so many. And well, we only learn from our mistakes, don't we? So I always think, you've got to make a few mistakes to kind of figure it out for the next one that you do. One of my favourites was definitely running out of transition with my helmet still on, because I'd been so worried about taking it off at the wrong point or putting it on at the wrong point. Ran out into the run and then was like, oh, I've still got my helmet on. Better go back and chuck it back in my little box. And then the other one, like little things, like just the basic prep. So the swims are usually like you get in off a pontoon into the lake and then you swim. And there was one that I turned up to and I hadn't looked, and it was a beach start where you had to run into the water and then kind of have this special kind of dive, which obviously I'd never practiced before, obviously did not even read the info about the swim. So yeah, turned up and just promptly kind of belly flopped into the water and just an absolutely dreadful start. Had no idea what was going on, and everybody was like, "What is this girl doing?" So yeah, they're probably my top two.
I think that kind of can put people off a little bit as well, can't they? All the rules and each event is so different.
Yeah.
When someone's maybe choosing their first triathlon, do you have any advice about how to go about choosing that event, whether it's the terrain or, as you mentioned, where you're swimming or the distances? Because there's so many options out there, it can be a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. One of the best ones that I often do with the people that I sort of help coach is try like a pool triathlon first. Often there's like a local one nearby. The pool ones are a little bit less daunting. You can usually go and check out the pool beforehand so that at least you kind of know what the pool side looks like and stuff. And the thing with pool triathlons often is you'll either get in your lane and you'll do, say, your 16 lengths, say your 400 meters or so. And you can do those 16 lengths within your lane up and down, and you just get out and walk off the pool side, out a door at the edge and down to transition that way. But sometimes they make you do it like a snake across the pool. So say you've got 8 lanes, you'll do 2 lengths in lane 1, duck under the lane rope, and then do 2 lengths in lane 2, and then so on and so forth. They're going across the pool to then bring you out closer to the door. So that's another thing that's kind of worth knowing about, because otherwise you turn up and you're expecting that you're just going up and down for 16 lengths, and there's this whole extra shenanigans you've got to do. Same kind of thing, I suppose, with the lake as well. A lot of local lakes that are kind of triathlon-y type areas will now do things like a go try. It's like a tiny mini one where you often get in, swim maybe 100 or 200 meters in the lake, and then it's just a chance really to practice a bit of a transition, kind of get used to all the swing of things. And you're not going to be there hours. Often they're really short, about half an hour or so, and they can be really, really good practices just to kind of get you dip your toe in the water and just be around people that are all really new to it and there's loads of marshals at those kinds of things, and they'll help you out the water, they'll explain where to go, all those things that you're kind of worried about, that can really, really help with. So a go try is definitely the way to go, and practice, controlling the controllable. So if you're a bit worried about the swim, go and find the lake that you might be swimming in, and then go and have a go in that one, or go and try and find the pool that you might be swimming in, and again, just kind of go and sort of suss it out a little bit before the big day.
And you mentioned transitions there, which again, I think are another source of like massive anxiety.
Oh yeah.
Because there's obviously 2 transitions within the event. So would you mind just walking us through what the transitions are and how, I guess, that can be recreated so that people can practice them at home and be as prepared as possible?
Of course. And oh my God, this is like a whole other 1-hour session in itself. So transitions, you have got your swim, you come out of the swim, and then you're going to go out on your bike. So the bit in between that is called T1, so transition 1. So within your transition 1, you need to somehow get your wetsuit or your hat and goggles off, and you need to prepare and get ready to go out on your bike. The main rules are, and this is it in its kind of simplest terms, is don't ever touch your bike unless you've got your helmet on. So if you are coming out of the water, take your wetsuit off, get your goggles and hat off. Again, that's something else I've done wrong, actually, tried to put my helmet on top of my hat and goggles, which just obviously was never going to work. So take those off, put your helmet on, do it up, and then think about putting your bike shoes on and then going out to go out on the bike. And then the second kind of rule of thumb, again, is there's a line as you come out of the transition area, and that is called the mount or the dismount line. So it'll be a line on the floor. There'll always be a marshal there. And it's basically, if you're going out of transition, you must get over this line before you can then jump on your bike and go off and do your bike course. And then that leads us quite nicely actually into transition 2. So when you've finished your bike, you come back and you encounter this line again, and you must get off your bike before coming back into transition. So basically, the long and short of it is you must always have your helmet on when you're touching your bike, and you must not ride your bike around transition. So the end of the transition zone is that mount or dismount line. So you just make sure you get on the bike after the line, or get off your bike before the line, before you come back into transition 2. And when you come back in from transition 2, you're coming back in from the bike and you're about to go out on the run. That is your time to start thinking, right, I've got to get back and put my bike on the rack in my area. And then I need to take my helmet off. I'm no longer touching my bike, so I can take my helmet off and then put your running shoes on and go out on the run. It's worth noting, I suppose, that sometimes the transition area is like a big square. So you might come in from the swim in one corner. You might go out on the bike from another corner of the square. You might come back in from the bike on another corner, go out on the run on another corner. So you kind of need to know like the directions that you'll be coming in on, because you can get really disorientated when there's lots of racks with lots of bikes on about, hang on, which direction am I going through? And one of the top tips that I say to people is check that before you even turn up to the race, and walk through that transition. So like you said, yeah, you can practice at home, taking that wetsuit off, putting your bike shoes on and your helmet, and then walking out with your bike. And you can practice coming back in from your bike and doing all the little mini taking off your helmet and putting your bike run shoes on and going out. But when you get there on the day, walk it through. So walk yourself from the corner that you come in from the swim and so on and so forth, just so you kind of orientate yourself, so you know exactly where your bike is going to be. Right, okay, when I come in from the swim, my bike's going to be on the left-hand side. That's where I should be looking for it, and vice versa if you're coming in from different points. It's quite simple if you can think about like having a bird's eye view over transition, but it's still very intimidating. I get that. There's so many things to think about.
Yeah, all the rules make sense, but then I'm thinking if you're tired, you're a bit stressed, you're wet, you're trying to pull off wetsuits, I can imagine it all gets crazy, especially if you're kind of new to triathlon.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, thank you for clarifying all of those rules. I think actually now would be a good point to actually just go through some of the kit that you need for these events, because as you mentioned, sometimes you have a wetsuit for the swim and then you're taking that off and presumably having, for most people, a tri-suit underneath. So would you mind just running through exactly what kit someone needs to do a triathlon? It doesn't need to be kind of kit for doing Ironmans, but just the basic kit for kind of initial first triathlons.
Yeah, I've actually got a list that I can send you, Amy. So if you want to put that on the site or whatever with this podcast, you can have it. Basically, you obviously need your bike shoes, your running shoes. They are like the 3 things that should be at the top of your list. And your wetsuit, obviously, to get through whatever this, but depends on what the swim is like. The extra kind of bonanza bits, I suppose, for triathlon that people might not have. The first thing would be a race belt, and it's basically a kind of it's just a clip on a bit of elastic, and it will have some way of attaching your race number onto it. So most of the time, and I would always advise, just leave that in transition. When you go into the swim, you'll have your number written on your hand or your ankle, usually in permanent marker, or you'll have some kind of wristband. You'll do your swim, and when you come back out and into transition, your race belt will have your kind of paper number on it, and that's when you want to just I often would put it on the floor and it's all done up in the size that I need it on the elastic, just step my feet into it and then just pull it up and around my waist. So you need your race belt, and you'll obviously have your number attached to that. While I'm talking about race belts, it's worth knowing, obviously, wherever you are in your triathlon, in your bike or your run, the commissaire, so the people that are kind of the rule people, I suppose, they need to see your number. So if you're on the bike, your number needs to be on the back. So that's why you have this belt, so you can twizzle it round. And then if you're running, they can obviously see you from the front. So you need your race number on the front. So you twizzle your number round so that your number is on the front. And they will remind you of that as you run out of transition and stuff. So just sort of make note of it. Again, that's something that most of us forget. So you might get halfway around the run and somebody's going, turn your number around, and you think, oh God, yeah, I didn't think about that. I would also say a little towel or something, so that you can then have that towel next to your bike in that transition area. So it's really obvious which one's your bike. I bought a bright blue towel. And even if you've got a black bike, you're looking for the bright blue towel on the floor with your green trainers or whatever on top. That's really helpful. And you can also use it to kind of dry your feet off if you're doing a triathlon where you might want to put socks on and stuff. Other helpful things, probably, I would say the next most helpful thing is your nutrition. So some kind of gel, or just even if you want to put your gel in water, squeeze it out into the water, and make sure that that's on your bike so you can have something to eat and drink while you're on the bike, and then that kind of gives you fuel for when you're running. Because often, despite us thinking we're kind of sprint distance athletes when we're doing a sprint triathlon, it's still an endurance event. It's still around an hour or so for most people, so you still need something to have whilst you're out there. You can have all the sort of fancy techie things if you want, a bike computer, run watch, all that stuff, but you don't really need, in most of the short distance stuff, you don't need it to kind of get around the course because it should be really well marshaled and signposted. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. I would just say make sure that you've got your race belt. That's usually the things people don't have beforehand. And make sure you've got your kind of kit for each sort of set session of the triathlon. Try suit for ladies or men, to be honest, is probably the other thing to invest in. But to be honest, you can do it. I did mine in a pair of running shorts and then just had like a sports bra and a top on in my first one. And then as you get a bit more into it, you kind of notice that the tri-suits are helpful because they've got a little bit of padding that can just be a bit more comfortable on the bike. Sometimes if it's a really cold day or if it's really wet, having a base layer or something to keep you warm in transition could be helpful to put on, because often you get quite cold on the bike and then you want something to kind of just keep you a little bit warmer so you're not freezing cold when you do get off and start to try and run for the last 5K or whatever.
There's a few things I just wanted to pick up on there. One of them was the nutrition that you mentioned. So would you recommend just taking that whilst you're on the bike? Obviously we can't take nutrition in when we're swimming, but do you leave that purely for the bike section and don't worry when you're running? Or do some people take things down during transition if maybe they're not so worried about time, so they don't have to be multitasking whilst on the bike? What's your tips?
Yeah, whatever's kind of useful. It depends on the distance that you're doing for the triathlon. So I would always recommend taking something every 40 minutes. So like just categorically, because you've got to think forwards. You've got to think, right, well, in the bike, I'm fueling for the run. I usually used to have a gel just before the swim as well. So that would kind of tie you over for the swim, maybe get you through to the bike, and then have something pretty soon as you've started on the bike. But yeah, it will all very much depend on yourself and how many calories and carbs you feel like you need for the time that you're kind of out for. For the longer distance triathlon, I did one half Ironman ever, and I did take loads of gels out with me on the run course, just so that I could kind of fuel for the next 20 minutes or 40 minutes or so. And usually on a race belt, they'll have there's a little wiggle in the elastic, and you can usually stuff your gels down in there, or just pop it down. If you're a lady, you pop it down your sports bra.
Good tip. Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to ask about was socks. Do you wear socks? Obviously, you're going to come out of the water and your feet are wet and you're trying to get them into your cycling cleat. I'm guessing maybe different people do different things, but what do you do?
Never wore socks, ever. I've had many races where I've had really bad blisters though. So I think I was always kind of like, I'm not sitting down and putting socks on in triathlon in transition, but I was always like a sprint distance athlete. I literally did, sprint distance tries or maybe a couple of Olympic tries. The one thing that really helped me with that, if you do think, no, I'm trying to race it and I'm trying to kind of save the seconds, because ultimately transition is like one of the best areas when you can overtake people. I used to love it if I'd come out of transition like 6 seconds before somebody else because they're faffing around putting socks on. I'd be like, yes. If you don't wear socks, put talc in your shoes. So when you're setting up your kind of transition area, put some talc in the bottom of your cycling shoes and in your running shoes. So obviously when you're soaking wet, the talc is just really helpful to kind of help get your feet into that shoe, and it can stop getting blisters. If you do want to put socks on, get them out, put them the right way around and lay them on top of the shoes that you're going to be putting on in transition. Because again, that's a little bit of a sort of save for time. Some triathlon shoes are built very cleverly. I had some, they're donkeys years old now though, but the Innovate Tri Extreme or something, I think they were called. And they were a bit more webbing on the top. So when your feet are really wet, the water doesn't just sit within the shoe, it would kind of squish out from the side. And they didn't have any seams inside, which was really helpful. So that really minimized blisters. I probably only found those after a year or so of doing triathlon. So, again, all these things, like, you can decide how much you want to do it dependent on A, how much you want to spend because it's a ridiculously expensive sport, or B, like how seriously you want to take it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I kind of wouldn't recommend those for beginners because I think you've already spent enough money on entering a triathlon, which is now about 80 quid.
Yeah, I recently entered one and then thought, oh, this is great. And then looking at everything I had to get, I didn't even have a wetsuit at that point. So yeah, the money keeps stacking up. So I guess where you can cut corners just to start off with and see if you enjoy it, it's worth doing. Another thing I had read about, so I've tried to do myself, is Velcro cycling cleats. And I've heard also about the elastic laces for running shoes. Is that something that you've tried?
Yeah. Sorry, I totally forgot about that. Yes, triathlon laces are helpful. The one thing that has definitely caught me out is when you're practicing in those, because obviously you need to practice in everything that you're going to use on race day when you're doing your training. And if you have been running in your triathlon trainers a week before and you've done them up and then you've just pulled your foot out at the end of that running session, make sure when you're setting up your transition area to pull the elastic laces, apart a little bit so there's a big hole for you to put your foot into. That's definitely something I got wrong once, and my foot was like dead for most of this run, and actually it was because the tongue of the shoe had just been like shoved down and under my toes, and I was basically running with like a numb foot for 5k, which wasn't very helpful. So yeah, the triathlon transition laces are really good, and they just make it a little bit quicker as well, but just make sure they're not too tight and stuff when you first put them on.
So I suppose, in summary, from everything we've discussed, that transition zone and actually taking the time out when you arrive to the race to set it up perfectly and to familiarize yourself with where to go is going to save you a lot of time during the actual race.
Yeah, and I often say to people, okay, you might want to get there an hour before. I'd add another 20 minutes on there, because if you go into the transition zone, will open, say you start at 8 a.m, the transition zone will probably open at, I don't know, 6:30 or 7 or so. But you do want to be in transition, 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, maybe just kind of putting your bike on the rack where you've been told to put it, laying your shoes out and your socks and putting the talc in, and little things as well can really help. If it's a hilly course, make sure that your bike is in an easy gear ready on the rack, so that when you come out of transition, you're not going to have to think, oh God, I'm in the wrong gear and I've got to change gear and all that kind of stuff. So, little things like that can be really, really helpful to you. Something I was going to say then, saving money in triathlon, like, it's such an expensive sport. When I did it, it was 8 years ago, so it was still fairly expensive then. The best thing I ever did was when I was in my local triathlon club, people would say, oh, do you want to borrow this, or do you want to try this? Like, just take them up on every offer. I hired a wetsuit for a couple of months, and then somebody said, oh, I've got an old one, do you want it second hand? So I paid like 40 quid for that. I borrowed a bike, I borrowed race wheels, I borrowed like everything. So it's worth borrowing, and just, don't spend all the money, because actually most people have got, it's like cycling, you buy a bike and then you go, oh, actually I really like cycling, so I want to buy a better bike. Most people have got a second-hand version of the first thing they ever had sitting there somewhere. So it's always worth joining a club and just asking people if you can borrow stuff. Like, definitely do that.
I think that also gives you an opportunity to try things out as well before you spend a load of money on something that you don't actually know it's going to suit you.
Yeah, and remember as well that often more money being spent doesn't always mean better bits of kit. It's about what works for you. Just because somebody's got a £600 wetsuit doesn't mean that they're the best swimmer ever. It really doesn't. So long as you can get around in it and it's comfy and it fits, if you've got a wetsuit that is 2 sizes too big for you and it's 600 quid wetsuit, that's not going to be any help to anybody. It's going to just be filling up with water. So it is definitely worth just reminding yourself that you can do it a little bit cheaper.
You mentioned wetsuits there, and I had a couple of questions about that. Any tips for, I guess actually a personal one that I've noticed recently is I've been trying to open water swim this week in my new wetsuit and had a lot of chafing around my neck. So I've been using Vaseline, which I'm not sure is the right thing to do, but it seems to have helped. So any tips for kind of just comfort levels in your wetsuit, and then also any tips for getting your wetsuit off quickly?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, so make sure that your wetsuit fits you is definitely like the best thing. So if you're looking for wetsuits, and this will go out to any beginners, I guess, make sure you look at the size guide, because quite often they'll have an indicator of what weight is equal to what size. So I've always had Zone 3 wetsuits, and they are fantastic. And they will have a range on them. And if you are on the border of the range, I would say go smaller, because the tighter the wetsuit, the less it's going to fill up with water. So that will massively help in terms of comfort levels. When you first get into the water, a good practice is to kind of pull the neck down. So that you want the water to flush through the wetsuit, because it helps with a bit of buoyancy, and it will just kind of sit a little bit better on the skin and around the shoulders and stuff. So that's quite a good tip. The shoulders and like neck, yes, they can get really, really rubbed. So firstly, I guess make sure it's kind of at the right level on your neck, so it's pulled up properly. If it's too low, it'll be sitting and catching on your tri-suit and stuff as well. Like Vaseline, baby oil. I used to just put baby oil kind of all over my arms and legs and neck and everything. Vaseline, absolutely fine. I have no idea how some of these companies like Body Glide charge what they do for effectively Vaseline. So, I wouldn't worry. Some people will say, oh yeah, it breaks your wetsuit down. That's rubbish. I've never seen any wetsuit break down because of a bit of Vaseline on it. So yeah, go cheap and cheerful. And just make sure that kind of leads quite nicely in to when you're getting that wetsuit off. If you've put loads of baby oil all over you, then it's so much easier to get off. Some people, when they're coming out of transition out of the swim and they're running towards transition, they'll be able to pull the zipper, get it down, and then start getting their arms out. The main thing is you pull the arm, so the shoulder off, and as you pull it down towards your hips, try and pull your hand up and out and kind of reach up for the stars, a bit like S Club 7. So yeah, like that's, as you pull down, pull your arm up and out of it as well. If you are using a wetsuit that you have bought for yourself or you own it, the next thing that's really helpful is to chop the wetsuit, which I know you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to like cut off £100 worth of wetsuit or whatever. Often the wetsuit will have kind of a seam that goes to the mid forearm, and then the bottom bit will be a bit of neoprene that's just kind of one block piece of material. You can chop up to that seam. So don't cut through the seam, but you can usually chop off a couple of inches from the wrist up to mid forearm. And if that's the case, it is so much easier to get your hands out. And it's just not caught really close around your wrist. The other thought with that is if you cut it a little bit higher, you actually feel the water better on your wrist. So you can improve your stroke a little bit more because you've got the kind of feel of the water on your forearm, if you are somebody who does front crawl. And you can do exactly the same on the legs as you would do for the arms. So you can chop the ankles up a couple of inches and just get rid of that bit of neoprene. All I say, is don't chop through a sort of seam of another panel. So long as it's kind of one piece. You'll see what I mean when you look at your own wetsuit. Most of them are now designed with that on it. So chopping the arms and legs, which feels awful, but it's really, really, it makes it so much easier. Pull your arm up and out, reach up for the stars, and then kind of pull it right down past your hips with both hands. So one hand on either hip. And you want to almost kind of squat down a little bit to get it over your bum. So you want to push down to your ankles with your hands and kind of keep your bum high so that it really just comes over your hips, because that's where it's going to get stuck. Ultimately, all of us are wider at our hips. So push down there, and then go for one leg at a time, push down onto the ankles with your wetsuit, and then pull your foot up and out, and then focus on the other leg. So if you watch any transitions of the World Tri Series, so like Google Brownlee World Tri Series transition, there's really good examples there because they have to do the same. They do still have wetsuit swims, so they're really good examples of just how to get out of that wetsuit super quick and practice it. I used to do it at home in my spare bedroom. I'd just put my wetsuit on and then take it off really quick and then time myself to do it. My other half used to think I was mad, but when you get it down to like 12 seconds, you're like, yeah.
Yeah, I've been practicing a lot. And I think actually one of the things that I've noticed is my watch keeps getting caught because I obviously
Oh, yeah.
record my swim. So maybe cutting it is the thing to do. But again, as
Yeah.
you said, that fills me with dread having to
Feels
cut this brand new wetsuit I've just bought.
feels awful. Yeah, I never used to wear a watch, to be honest. I used to like the swim was the swim. I wouldn't mind whatever it was. And then I would just have a bike computer. And the bike was the main thing that would help me, like, so I could look at the computer to kind of know where I'm at and what speed I'm going. And then for the run, I'd just be like, well, I'm just running to the finish. So yeah. But yeah, I've made that mistake a few times and thought, oh my gosh, yeah, gets caught really tight over it. It's worth. I just
Yeah,
take it off.
especially with how
Take it
big
off.
the watches are nowadays. Maybe I do need to ditch it for race
Yeah,
day.
yeah, definitely. Like it's great for training. You'll get your overall kind of times and stuff at the end anyway, because you'll have a chip on. Um, I guess that's a good point as well. You'll have your ankle timing chip, and do try if you can and make sure that's under your wetsuit, even if your wetsuit is kind of chopped at the ankles, because then at least it's holding it on. I've definitely heard, it's never happened to me, but I've heard of people losing their ankle timing chip in the water. It usually has Velcro on it, but I used to put a safety pin through it as well. Just make sure that the safety pin isn't pushing into your ankle, push it out of your ankle, so that then at least if it does come undone, you're not going to get spiked by it.
So we've spoken a lot about the event day and what to do during the race. What are the tips for trainings? I think if someone's got a marathon coming up, it's so easy to go online and just download a standard marathon training plan. But for triathlon, there's obviously the 3 different disciplines. Do you recommend practicing more on the disciplines that you're not as strong at? Do you recommend an equal split? How do you kind of advise people to train for these events?
The best thing I would say is, yes, exactly what you said. Making sure that you're not just practicing the one that you love all the time. So if you're a runner by trade, you'll kind of go, oh, lovely, I'll always do the running session. Like, no, that's not the one you should be practicing. You should be getting in the pool and doing the thing that you actually really struggle with. So definitely do a strength weaknesses analysis or whatever you want to do, and then figure out, yeah, this is the one that I'm not so happy with. But then it's building your training week in. Like the one thing that helps people is planning their training week, looking and aiming to just get consistency across all the disciplines, and really building in and just being smart with it. So, you're not doing a hard run session and a hard bike session on the same day. That's just stupid. Like your body won't cope. Categorically, you always need to have one rest day a week. And when I say rest day, I mean a rest day, like absolutely nothing on that day, not even stretching, Pilates, yoga, whatever. Like, this is your day to actually just adapt and get all of those gains, because people just don't respect that within triathlon. And that's why people get overuse injuries. Like the physio in me is like, that's the first thing I say to people. Like, if you're on a training program with me, you are getting a full rest day a week. And if you can't cope with that, I'm not training you, because that's just not going to work. So building your week in and maybe trying to do, usually I'd say to people, say your swim is the weakest, try and do 3 swims a week, because that's something that you really need to work on and you need to have regular kind of input with and practice, and that's what's going to make you feel confident. Plus, then if you can't get the consistency of that week because of work or kids or whatever, then actually, even if you still do 2 that week, that's still fairly good. And then I would say, so say you're a runner by trade and you're coming into triathlon, I would say aim for 3 swims a week. One of them technique based, one of them aerobic, and one of them with a little bit of speed work, and building up to a distance that you would need to do in the triathlon. So if you need to swim 400 meters, you need to be able to do that continuously in training. And you can swap that in and out if you want to do a lake swim as well, depending on what triathlon you've entered. Then biking, if you were a runner, I would say, do 2 sets of bikes, and then try and do 1 run or 2 runs a week. What you can do is link 2 of them together, and this is the next point that I'd say is the most important, is a brick session. So that's practicing running off the bike. One of my favourite sessions that sounds really daunting but used to really get you fit for practicing to run off the bike was what we called a double brick session. So it's a bike run. And it doesn't need to be hours. You could do 20 minutes of cycling, and you could do it at the gym, or you can do it outside at home from the garage or whatever, and practice transitions in between. You could do 20-minute bike, 10-minute run, 20-minute bike, 10-minute slightly faster run, might be an hour. Those kinds of brick training sessions are like categorically the best thing that you can do for practicing triathlon, because they're the things when you start getting off the bike in the actual race, you'll go, oh my God, my legs feel like jelly. And you need to be able to kind of harness that and go, no, it's okay. I've practiced that before. And that's what I'm going to do in this for the next 5K or so. So yeah, they're my definitely top tips for training, and just making sure that you have days where you are more restful than others, and where you are not, battering yourself every day and kind of doing really hard training sessions back to back. You can usually get away with like a hard running session, maybe, I don't know, Tuesday night, into like a slightly harder swim session in the morning, because ultimately, you're swimming and you're not using quite as much. It's not as high intensity, really, is it?
Yeah, I think I can imagine it's so easy to go over the top with triathlon because you've got 3 sports to do, and to try and fit them in a week is actually quite challenging.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll always bang on about relative energy deficiency in sport, RED-S, and that is chronic in endurance athletes, and it's chronic in triathletes because they don't respect their bodies, and they don't understand the ability to rest, and they don't see that actually you don't have more miles in cycling or running or swimming. More miles does not mean that you're a better performer. You can still have excellent high quality sessions, and you keep the easy days easy and the hard days hard, and you can still train. I don't think I ever ran more than about 20 miles a week, and I was training up to like Olympic distance triathlon. And you don't need to be riding 200 miles a week. Like, more hours on the turbo does not mean that you're going to be a better performer. If you're doing e-racing, great, get on the turbo. But if you're going outside to do your biking, you need to be outside doing your biking and get used to all different weathers, because that's what's going to get your technical ability stronger. They're all the things that you'll be working on in a really easy ride, is your technical ability, your ability to deal with the nutrition that you need to take on, or your ability to just control the bike outside,
Yeah, and I think that's true for the swimming as well. If you're swimming in open water, to actually practice swimming in open water.
Yeah.
And that leads me to my final question, which is, any tips for swimming in a straight line? That is difficult.
Yeah. It will very, very, very much depend on your technique to start off with. And I can categorically say I have not always been very good at this. If you can, and you're coming from a background where you're not like the strongest swimmer, but you can kind of get through it, I definitely say see if you can get some lessons, because some lessons are really helpful in the pool, and potentially if you can at least get somebody to look at your swimming in a lake. Quite often lakes will now have like some kind of coach session and stuff there, and people will watch you, because it is quite different. But if you get better technique in the swimming pool, then you'll get better technique and more efficiency in the open water swimming as well. I would always say try and breathe to both sides. So again, if you can get breathing to both sides every 3 strokes maybe, or every 5 strokes in the pool, that will transfer much better over into open water swimming. There's different techniques for open water swimming, but I used to kind of breathe slightly to the side, and then pull my head up and look forwards, and then go straight back down into the stroke. People will do it slightly differently. And again, watch some videos and stuff about open water swimming online. That will really, really help. And there's always different techniques. I think Swim Smooth probably have some videos for open water swimming technique too. But breathing and regularly sighting and looking ahead is the best thing you can do. Don't just follow everybody else. I've definitely because often when you start off, you're in a group and there might be 20 people starting at a swim. Actually, I think that's probably a bit different now because of COVID, because you'll be set off, every 20 seconds or so. But if you are near another swimmer, quite often you see them and you're like, oh, great, I'm going to get in behind them and try and draft and in my swimming. And then you just follow them. And if they're going off course, so are you. So, don't believe anybody. Just look for the boy and make sure you can see the boy. And if you can't see it, don't just, believe that you've seen it. Actually stop, do a breaststroke stroke, look up, find it, and then get going again. So it's much better to do that than veer off course and then have to come back in to get onto the course, and you've actually swum, double the distance that you should have swum. And I wouldn't have any vulnerability or worry about, doing a little bit of breaststroke here and there if you need to just catch your breath, or just make sure that you know exactly where you're going.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think there's no point spending all this time training to do fast swimming and then not having practiced swimming in a straight line and getting your technique right, and losing all that time by swimming twice the distance.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. That's been so helpful, very helpful for me, and hopefully for everyone listening. Is there any final tips or advice that you wanted to share for anyone I guess, seasoned triathletes or those kind of planning for their first one coming up?
It should be fun. So if it's not fun, don't do it. Training shouldn't be a chore. We should be doing it because we enjoy sport. Again, don't get sucked into that. I need to do more. I need to do more. Now it's really stressful. There are ways of making this fun, believe it or not. So yeah, just the top tips that I always say: join a club, make it social, chat to other people with loads more experience around you, and just enjoy it. That's what sport's about. None of us are going to be Olympic athletes. We don't need to be. We've all got jobs, so that's why we do sport, is our outlay for that.
Excellent, thanks so much. And if people want to find more about you, find you on social media, where can I direct them to?
So my website is www.becky-hair.co.uk, or my Instagram, which has a lot of free resources and strength videos and that kind of stuff, is at TRI_raving, RAVING.
Great, thanks so much.
Sweet, thank you very much, Amy.
Many thanks to Becky for answering all my triathlon questions and helping me feel a little bit more prepared for my event in a couple of weeks' time. You can find Becky on Instagram by searching try_raving, or you can visit becky-hair.co.uk. You can also visit my website at marathonmedic.com, where you'll find other podcast episodes, blog posts, running routes, and session ideas. Thanks so much for listening.